W.C. Fields, A Life on Film, the name of a new book by Ronald Fields, who happens to be W.C.'s grandson. Good morning, Ron.
Good morning, Ken. How are you?
Real good. This is a good book.
Thank you.
I happen to be a real Fields fan, and there are several of us around here who just get so many laughs and so many, so many pleasurable moments whenever they run an old W.C. Fields film on television. Some of us will stay up until the wee hours of the morning to catch one.
Sure, that's what you have to do.
And, you just don't... Occasionally, they go in spurts. You know, every station who tries to, boost its ratings or whatever they're trying to do, will be running W.C. Fields for a while. And then the longest time passes and you don't see anything. They're as good now as they ever were, I think. In fact, there's a certain amount of charm, I think, because they are old. It's kind of a reflection of comedy. Any comedian who wants to learn the art of comedy can learn an awful lot from watching your grandfather.
I think not only that, but even when he made them, the critics complained that they were cheaply made. And my comment in the book is that that didn't bother Fields. He would be just as funny in front of a multi-million-dollar set as he was in these very cheap sets that they had. And so I think that helps make it timeless. If he made them again today, the only difference would be it'd probably be in color. And it would be the same cheap sets, but he knew what he was doing to get the laugh.
Speaking of cheap sets, Fatal Glass of Beer comes to mind. It ain't a fit night out for man or beast.
I know. Well, you know the thing that, in fact, when I can't fault the critics on this, because when I first saw it, I thought the same thing. I go, how terribly made. And then when I saw it the second time, the third time, I started finding more things in it that were funny. And
it's a masterpiece, I think.
Yes, I do too.
You know, the funny thing is, and I've heard this before, and maybe some of the things we've heard about W.C. are not true. You know, so many great lines are attributed to him that I don't know if he'd ever said them or not, but they surf at his character.
Sure.
But did he hate Charlie Chaplin?
Yes, that is probably true, and it was the same reason. I'll tell you, it's funny, because there is a connection. It's the same reason why he hated children. He could not stand not to be the center of attention. So when a child would come into a room and he was entertaining, he'd say, what good is that child? I've been working to be the center of attention. So the same thing with Chaplin, when they started saying, well, Chaplin is the greatest and W.C. is second, or it would go back and forth. W.C. is the greatest and Chaplin is the second. Well, that was a competition. Mm-hmm. W.C. just figured that Charlie Chaplin was a GD ballet dancer and nothing else.
Yeah. Let me explain something. I've got a theory, and maybe you can refute it. Chaplin made the film The Gold Rush.
Right.
That reminds me of Fatal Glass of Beer because it takes place in the frozen country. Mm-hmm. Only Chaplin hired all these extras. He hired, as I recall, derelicts, just thousands of them, for one particular opening scene where they're all climbing up the mountain in search of gold.
Uh-huh.
Your grandfather came along a few years later, made one, and made no pretensions that it was just plain cheap. He had caribou running in the background on rear screen projection, and even the scenes of the caribou would change while he was in front of it.
Sure.
I think maybe he did that with Chaplin in mind, saying...
That is a very astute insight. I do not mention that in my book. And in fact, and not until you mention it now does it seem to make sense. What I was doing, what I mentioned in my book, is Robert Service's poems were very popular then. And so were the Yukon dramas, and he just spoofed them in general, which I think is true. Mm-hmm. But then the added part of it, which I think is very good on your part, is it probably was a takeoff of Chaplin's too, and because Chaplin's look phony when they have those shots in the background where Chaplin's standing in front, it did look phony too in that. Mm-hmm. So he probably was in fact doing that.
Who knows? But it's a funny film, and of course that line is repeated over and over. It ain't a fit night out for man or beast. Yeah. Great stuff. The book that you put together is neat. In fact, I have to ask you about this. You give a little mention to Al Kilgore, who passed away not too long ago.
Right.
Did he help you put together or come up with some kind of a format? I'm just wondering why you mentioned him.
Well, actually, it's one of those things where he's a very dear friend. Well, it's not a cartoon drawing. The caricatures that separate the introduction of each movie from the synopsis and then the close of the synopsis to my reviews, that caricature was drawn by Al Kilgore, and it's his original.
Okay. There's another book out on Laurel and Hardy that Kilgore had a hand in.
Right.
And, it's considered the Bible when it comes to Laurel and Hardy and their films. And this book reminds me a little bit of that because it's kind of laid out the same way. Only instead of derbies, when it comes to rating the movies, you use martini glasses.
Exactly. Well, there's a distinct connection here. The Laurel and Hardy book, one of the writers in that, or one of the researchers, was Richard W. Vann, who was also the filmographer in my book. The fellow who put that book together, though I think in some areas it's a little too cluttered, and he didn't. And I asked him not to do the same for my book. Was the same fellow who put mine together, Alex Soman, and of course Al Kilgore. There's a connection in both books, so it's a lot of the same people, and I'm the new guy on the block.
Okay. Well, it's a good book. In fact, it may become the official film book for Fields, and who better to write it than a relative of his?
Thank you very much.
I understand that you didn't know that W.C. was your grandfather.
No, it was a surprise to me, particularly being raised in a house where no alcohol could be stored. My father was a teetotaler, but we used to be able to stay up late at nights, even on the school nights, to watch my grandfather's films. But at that point, I didn't know it was my grandfather. It was always W.C. Fields' films. And I was the youngest of 5, and I think everyone else in the family just assumed I knew, but no one told me. And one night I was watching It's a Gift, and I still think that is one of the top 2 films W.C. ever made.
The back porch scene, I agree with you, is probably the funniest thing, or at least one of the funniest things ever put on film.
Oh, so with Carl Lafong.
What do you call it? Frustration comedy, I guess. The poor man is trying to get some sleep, and he can't. There's no way he's going to get any sleep.
I know. I think it's, and not only that, but the craziness that surrounds him. His response to it always is very human. If you notice, it's not slapstick. It's not pies in the face. He almost represents us in a very crazy world. I mean, all these things happening around him that we may or may not relate to, but at least he stays the same. He stays very human. I think that's what makes him so funny.
I think the other thing is he comes across as being a charlatan of sorts. He's always trying to get the best of somebody else through any means possible, and yet he always winds up with the worst of it.
Yes, but on the other hand, he's the type of guy that also gets into serendipitous wealth at the end of a lot of his movies.
Like in It's a Gift.
Exactly, like in It's a Gift, the Orange Grove turns into be a gas station where he makes $1 million, a racetrack where he's going to make $1 million off the deal, plus the Orange Grove that he always wanted. And his family comes back to him. I think that is the point I try to make throughout, is that always at the end, or nearly always at the end, his family always returns. And now they're happy because he's rich and famous, or rich anyway.
Yeah.
And I think that's what he wanted in his own life, and more or less portrayed that in films, with a comic twist, of course.
Would you say that W.C. Fields mostly always played himself?
He created a character.
The character was pretty much the same, though, in all the films, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Even when he plays the rogue in one or the browbeaten husband in the other, he's still kind of the same guy who really has very little control over what's happening around him. When he's bombastic in one, it's a cover-up for the lack of control he has. And in the other type of movie, he still shows this lack of control because he's browbeaten by a wife and then ends up rich.
The only exception, and I haven't seen it, might be Alice in Wonderland.
That, you see, he has such a small role in that. That's about a 10-minute piece, I think, in the entire movie. And he's playing a character that was written. It's not his character, etc. So Alice in Wonderland would be a difference. Macabre would be a slight difference, although he ends up somewhat of a hero at the end of that, of course, but that's Dickens' writing. So, there are a few movies where he appears in cameo roles where he's not playing the type of character that we're all familiar with. But generally he does. When he has his hand and his control over a movie, you'll see the W.C. that we're familiar with.
Yeah. This is your second book, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
You put together W.C. Fields by himself.
Correct.
And I have that one. It's falling apart. Did it ever come out in hardcover?
Yes, it was originally hardcover.
I didn't find out about it till it made it in the paperbacks, and now my paperback is falling apart and the pages are loose and all that. But I found that to be interesting because the pool table routine was used over and over again. A lot of his bits that you look at and you think they're hilarious, you wonder why they're so funny. The reason might be because he worked and developed the timing and all that is necessary for great comedy over the years, didn't he?
Sure. In fact, Louise Brooks writes about Fields, particularly in the silent era, where when he would set up for a scene, to go back to what the conclusion to this will be, and I'll explain it, is she said she always preferred the stage Fields over the movie Fields. And the reason why was when WC would set up a scene for the film camera, he would move his feet, his legs, his arms, his hands, everything for the greatest comic effect. Well, of course, and that would work great on the stage. But of course, in a movie where the camera's only showing from his waist up, you miss how he's holding his legs, or just a facial shot, you'll miss how he's moving his arms. And so she said he really didn't understand the medium, particularly in the silent films.
Mm-hmm. We're talking with Ron Fields, author of W.C. Fields, A Life on Film, and we'll be right back. There's been a lot of things written about W.C. Fields. I don't know how many books have been authored. I can think of at least two others. One written by Carlotta Monti, who was supposedly your grandfather's mistress. Is that a fair assessment there?
That's what she says, sure.
In the book, she talks about how Fields... Well, it's been a while since I've ever looked at it, but she talks about how Fields denied that he ever had a son or something like that, and I don't know how accurate that is.
Yeah, well, what would happen is that W.C. and my father were somewhat estranged, were estranged during my father's growing up years. After he graduated from Columbia Law School, my father moved out to Hollywood with his mother, and then my father and he started getting in correspondence again, seeing each other for dinner. And they started coming back together, as it shows in his movies, but never a real close relationship. The story she talks about, and it's rather a well-known story, is that his son was supposedly to have come to the house, knocked on the door, and the butler answered, and the butler said, "It's your son," and W.C. said, "Well, offer him a drink, I'll be right down," and the son says he doesn't drink, so the butler goes back up to tell him he doesn't want to drink, which right there I said, that's kind of silly, why would a butler do that? But W.C. says, well, then he's no son of mine, get him out of the house. What actually happened is W.C. had a girlfriend in the Follies. Her name was Bessie Poole, and they broke up, and she later married this fellow who turned out to be an alcoholic, and she had a son by him. But he was very fond of her, and he would always send her money. And his secretary, a woman named Magda Michael, W.C. secretary, asked him once, she said, you know, there are rumors that this is your son. And he goes, no. He goes, that's just not true. He says, but if you really cared for someone, and she has a son who, in fact, was, I think he had a club foot, was crippled, wouldn't you want to take care of him? That's how kind and generous this man was with all this stuff against him. And one day he showed up and claimed he was his son and wanted to get in on some of the wealth, and that's why Fields kicked him out.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the biggest myths we've heard?
Geez, you know, almost everything he says, there's a particle of truth to it. So when you say, is it a myth that he drank so much? No, he really did drink that much.
Okay, he did drink a lot.
Oh, yes, yeah, from early morning till late at night.
But he was never drunk, supposedly.
The myth goes on that he was always drunk, and in fact, everyone I talked to, everyone who worked with him, everyone who knew him, said they never saw the man drunk. And that's when I talked to him. Now, some people have refuted that after I've talked to him, but I think it's really to embellish a story more than anything else. W.C. would show up late for the set. That's absolutely true. And later on in his life, when the alcohol was taking effect, they would maybe close the set earlier than normal. But the reason is because he wasn't well, not because he was drunk. Now, he wasn't well because of the alcohol, but it wasn't because he was drunk and couldn't do any work.
I've heard another rumor that he put money in banks all over the country in different names.
Yeah, there is that particle of truth. He, in fact, did, and not only all over the country, but all over the world. When he was in vaudeville, they wouldn't pay by check, they'd pay by cash. And W.C. was afraid to carry the amount of money he was making in his pocket, so he'd open up a bank account in each town. Or not each town, but just about each town that he played. So he may have a bank account in Bloomington, Illinois, because he played there one day. And he would put it away, but his secretary knew exactly, he kept exact records. He would always put it under his own name, because with W.C. having a reputation of being so parsimonious, if he used any other name, he couldn't get the money out. So he used it. He used his own name and kept impeccable records. So all of that was recovered. Unfortunately, it wasn't that much.
Okay. The fact that he hated kids, not all that true, probably.
That goes back to what we were talking about with Chaplin. He just couldn't stand kids stealing the show when he was entertaining at home.
Mm-hmm.
But that's also the same reason why he used them so often in his movies. He wanted to prove he could upstage a kid.
Yeah. Great scene in The Old-Fashioned Way with Baby Leroy, and he finally gets to kick Baby Leroy.
When he first kicked him, I guess Baby Leroy took flight.
Oh, really?
Yes, and the producers and the director, they just saw it on film. They say, we're taking that out. You're going to offend too many people. This is going to create an uproar throughout the country. WC fought to keep it, and finally there was the compromise. We'll film it again. This time I'll only tap him lightly in the front of him, and which they eventually did.
Mm-hmm.
And someone asked WC, said, well, why did you fight so hard to keep a scene in like that? And WC said, there was not a man alive who hasn't wanted to boot a child at least once in his life.
Mm-hmm. Well, people are still getting humor out of that. I think everybody seems frustrated because either their kid or somebody else's kid is just driving them nuts at the moment. And so I can't remember who used... I'll tell you who said something along that line. Gallagher came up with a great line. Said, the reason God made kids so cute is so you don't kill them.
That is classic.
It's 23 minutes after 10 o'clock. Some great... I have to take a little argument for... I agree with you. It's a Gift happens to be one of my favorite Fields films. Mm-hmm. The Bank Dick is another one.
Right.
But I really like My Little Chickadee. I really like it. You only give it 2 martini glasses.
Yeah, I honestly never liked that film. And in my opinion, I think it's one of the worst Fields made. However, as a complete film, however, in my opinion, if you took out WC's parts and just had him on the camera and filmed the movie that way with his scenes, then I think it would be a hilarious movie, because I think his scenes are outstanding in that. But then when they start getting into, I don't like Mae West singing Lily of the Valley. I don't like some of these scenes with Dick Foran and things like that. It just, to me, it was so disjointed as a complete movie. I just didn't like it, and I don't like Mae West that much.
Yeah, there are scenes when he's the fact that he's dressed with a top hat and all that kind of thing when he arrives to what is the town called?
Greasewood City, is it, or
Greasewood Gulch or Greasewood City or whatever,
yeah.
and he becomes the sheriff. There's the battle on the train with his slingshot, shooting, and he's catching arrows that are slung by Indians.
Well, you know
there are some outrageous scenes. I love the fact when he's in the bar and they're talking about this rough gal that came in one night.
Oh yeah, Chicago Molly.
Yeah, and how the 2 of these guys cleaned up on her.
I know. Yeah, but they came back a day later and beat the both of them.
Yeah.
But she didn't do it alone. She had another woman with her.
Anyway, there are great moments in it. I like it, and I've seen other people who rate it, 4 stars.
Yeah, I know. I knew I was going to be out on the limb on this one, because it really is a favorite of a lot of people.
Yeah.
As I say in the key to the book, it's my book. I'm going to do it my way. And I never liked that film.
Yeah. Well, I wanted us to understand why you did that.
I think it's primarily because of Mae West. Sure. And when I showed up to the studio the next day, 2 days later, I asked, where's Mae West? Because she wasn't there, of course. And I asked, is she going to show up later? What's the story? And he says, well, Ron, when we asked her if she'd be on the show with you, she said she didn't want to meet another Fields as long as she lived.
Hold her grudge as long as you can.
That's right.
It's 26 minutes after 10.
After 27 years in business, as always, delivery is free.
Time flies by so quickly, and I was just asking Ron what his schedule is like this morning. If you can, I'd sure like to let people talk to you and ask you any questions maybe that they have about WC Fields, because I know there's an awful lot of Fields fans around. Maybe we can do that on the other side of the news. Is that okay, Ron?
That's fine with me.
Plus, I just have a few more questions, and maybe we can just keep you another 5 or so minutes
great.
over then. I want to talk about how his character developed. A lot of people don't know that your grandfather was a juggler at one time, and maybe we can touch on some of those things as well. First, if we can answer that question in about a minute. He was sort of a tramp juggler, wasn't he?
Yeah, Well, one of the reasons why he dressed up in a beard and a top hat and old clothes, that's because he did not come from a rich family, and that's the way he traveled, and he wasn't getting paid much. Mostly vaudeville theater managers were taking his loot. And he's also quite young, and his first gig was in a pool hall, a beer hall, I'm sorry. And he was too young to be playing there, and so he covered himself up by putting on this fake beard. And it went over well, he kept it.
Did he run away from home?
No, it was so funny. He always told that story, but when I read the very beginning interviews, when he's first being interviewed, when he's on the Keith Orpheum circuit, he never says that. It's only about 10 years later when he decides, I'm getting bored telling how I left home. I'm going to embellish this a bit.
Got hit in the head with a shovel or something? Or?
Yeah, well, that's the way the story goes. His sister Adele, who I interviewed, told me that she walked him to the train station. She and her mother walked up to the train station when he first left for Atlantic City. Nothing like that. She used to laugh when I asked her about, did they fight that much? W.C., it turns out, really was a juvenile delinquent, and that he teased his father unmercifully because his father was a Cockney Englishman, and he would tease him about his accent all the time. So it seems like W.C. was the ogre, not his father.
Mm-hmm. Let's break for the news. We'll get people up to date, and we'll be back to talk more about W.C. Fields on film, A Life on Film, by his grandson, Ron Fields.
Moberly and Clinter and Ulbrich and Traps. 60 degrees. Dwayne Moss, WJBC News.
Thank you very much. We'll get the news again in an hour.
You got it, buddy.
I don't do it all that well, but it's kind of fun to try.
It's a lot better than mine.
See, a lot of people try to come up with that voice and wonder, did he talk like that when he was off stage and off the movies?
Yeah, that's it. My mother told me that. He said what he used to do was exaggerate the voice, but he talked the same way. He talks the same way among friends and relatives. The funny thing is that nasal twang and the slow speaking and so on, he picked up from his mother. She used to do that.
I'll be darned.
And they both had sinus trouble, so that's why the voice was that way. In fact, he picked up so much from his mother, which cracks me up because I saw a photograph of her taken in, let's say 1900, let's say. And she looks remarkably and unfortunately like the W.C. of the 1930s and 40s, big nose and all, and she was a teetotaler.
I'll be darned. I always figured he must talk loud, too. In fact, a great skit, I don't think it's ever happened or ever was made or anything, but I can just see your grandfather coming in announcing, yes, I'm the new babysitter. Just making the entrance wakes up the baby, of course, because he talks too loud.
Well, of course, in Six of a Kind, he says, how come he talks so loud? I got to talk loud. I'm the sheriff.
Yeah, great logic.
I know.
So how's come they call you Honest John?
Oh, the explanation of that is so funny, and it's so quick, and that scene is so long.
Yeah.
It takes him forever. It turns out that because he returned the guy's glass eye, and ever since that day, he's known as Honest John.
But
It takes
just as
10 minutes to get it out.
But just as he does it, he rips a great big hole in the pool table and covers it up with a basket.
Puts his arm around Dr. Beebe, and ever since that name.
Yeah, great funny moments. In fact, and some of the films, I think you'll have to be honest, and I will too. Some of the films we like better than others.
Oh, sure.
I like one better than you like.
Exactly, and that's why, of course, that's why you always have problems with critics and reviewers, and I will have the same thing with this book, I'm certain. Some people are going to like it, some aren't, and My Little Chickadee, and I didn't like that, you did,
yeah.
But we both agree on The Bank Dick and It's a Gift as probably being the two tops.
I heard somebody say you got to see Fields. This is before I discovered him.
Uh-huh.
And I'm really glad they turned me on to him. But the first Fields film I saw, and you rated 4 martini glasses, or 4 stars, Man on the Flying Trapeze.
Oh, yes. I love that one.
Now, I really have to be honest with you. I didn't understand Fields' character at first. And until you do, you don't really appreciate him.
I know. That's the one thing I found out while researching this book. Every time I see a film, I see more in it. And the perfect example is A Fatal Glass of Beer, which if I had written this book after the first time I've seen it, I would have given it a negative martini rating because I really thought it was that bad. But now, as you said, it's just a classic. It really took me about 3 or 4 screenings for me to say, hey, this is a funny film. He's doing a lot more here than meets the eye.
Yeah. In fact, after that was done, according to your book, he was kind of uncertain himself, wasn't he, whether or not he wanted to continue with Max Sennett?
Oh, sure, because Max Sennett wanted to change a few things in the film, and some of the things he did. And WC, again, that's WC. He knew exactly what he wanted. And Max Sennett got his way in most of things, and WC got his in others.
Mm-hmm. Didn't WC make more money for Universal or save Universal at one of its critical times?
Oh, sure. That's what that actually, it's so difficult to prove, but the rumor's so prevalent that you've got to believe it. Evidently, that the Universal was going under around the late 30s, and they went for $1 million loan from the Bank of America, and the Bank of America would not give it to them.
Mm-hmm.
Unless they signed WC and starred a movie starring W.C. Fields, and that's how You Can't Cheat an Honest Man came about.
Okay. My Little Chickadee, I think, was the biggest moneymaker for Universal, wasn't it?
In fact, it goes back. I mentioned that. I say, even though I gave it bad reviews, here's the movie. It was the biggest moneymaker not only for the studio, but for WC's biggest moneymaker.
Why did he switch from Paramount to Universal?
And Paramount would not renew his contract. There are a number of reasons. They always had trouble with Fields. Fields wanted to do it his way. He was always fighting with someone in charge. But also, Paramount was changing their style of movies. They started getting rid of all their big-name actors because of price cutting and started going into B movies. And Universal at that time was saying, well, we'll take all these people. So there was a general trek from Paramount over to Universal.
Mm. If you had the opportunity to talk to your grandfather today, would there be any question that you'd really like to ask him?
Yeah, may I have another drink? I would really like to ask him what my deductions in the book are, and see what he have to say. And the deduction is that he did put his life on screen. When all his pet hates and loves and foibles and so on, he portrays. And eventually attacking the studio in his very last movie, and himself, actually. In his very last movie, You Can't Cheat an Honest Man. I mean, Never Give a Sucker an Even Break, his last feature length. And I would like to ask him, he says, did you do this consciously? Was this something that actually came out, or is it something similar to what Joseph Heller said when he was asked, everyone says you have so much meaning in your books, do you? And he goes, yeah, they're probably all right. I didn't think about it at the time, but it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to know if it was really a conscious effort. It seems to be.
Or was he just doing a job?
Exactly. I don't think he would fight so hard. See, that I think is what made me start investigating this a little more deeply. Honestly, if I think he was just doing his job, he probably wouldn't have fought so much with these people, because that more than anything else made him lose jobs, was his fighting. So I get the feeling that he must have. There was a lot more to it than just doing a job.
Mm-hmm. Here it is. The guy passed away in 1946 on Christmas Day. We're still talking about him. The world still loves him. In fact, there are new people who aren't even born yet that'll be coming along who will become Fields fans.
Yeah, well, it's so funny. A number of years ago, I was introduced to this little 3-year-old girl. Her mother introduced me, and she goes, "This is Ron Fields. This is when I had my first book out." And he says, she said, "Do you know who W.C. Fields is?" And the girl says, "No." The little girl. She goes, "Well, do you know who W.C. Fritos is?" And the girl goes, "Yes," and her face beams. And he goes, "Well, that's his grandfather."
Do you remember the character in the commercials? Huh?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Ron, it's a good book. There are some films mentioned in here that I haven't been mentioned in some of the other books that have come out. His Lordship's Dilemma, some of the early ones.
Right.
What's the other one? In fact, the movie that was made before It's a Gift, where he used the back porch. The Old Army Game?
Yeah, it's the Old Army Game.
Yeah. You do a very complete review, and there's some pictures in here I've never seen before. I've seen a lot of different publicity shots and things of Fields through the years, and all of a sudden there's some new ones out now.
Yeah, we tried to. What I actually tried to do is go through as many books on Fields that are out. I believe I covered all of them, and tried not to duplicate any of the photographs. Of course, you can't do that, but so in some cases there are the stock ones that are familiar. But I think in most cases we have photographs that just haven't been seen before.
Yeah. Well, Ron, I hope we get to do it again. Maybe we can talk when we're in Philadelphia.
Okay, great.
It's a black cover book. Look for it. If you're a Fields fan or want to know more about the movies, it's a thoroughly entertaining book. It goes for $14.95. Ronald J. Fields, author of W.C. Fields, A Life on Film. Have a good day.
You too, Ken, and thank you so much.
We have 30 seconds to tell you about...
13 and a half in front of 11. Ron is 35 years of age, so he never had a chance to meet his grandfather. But his grandfather and grandmother just saved everything. There are just trunks and photographs, and the old pool table still exists. And it's a very insightful book into the life of W.C. Fields, I think, and his movies. 13 minutes in front of 11 o'clock. How long ago was it when they did the W.C. Fields and Me? This is music from that show. I don't mean to put that picture down, but it was awful. Nice music. Henry Mancini supplied that, and Rod Steiger did an okay job, I think, of his portrayal of Fields. But the problem is, somebody sat down and said, let's make a movie about the funniest man in film history, and let's make an unfunny movie about him. Hardly any laughs at all. I don't think there is a laugh in the whole movie about W.C. Fields. W.C. Fields and Me, the movie based on the book by Carlo DeMonte. Ron Fields was our guest this morning. I enjoyed that conversation. Nice fella. It's going to be partly cloudy today. Showers developing this afternoon. We'll get up to about 68 for the high. Rain ending tonight, a low 44. And then sunny, breezy tomorrow with a high of about 60.